Hi, everyone. Good morning from New York, and good afternoon or good evening from wherever you are. This is Roy Small with the United Nations Development Program, and I'm pleased to welcome you all to today's webinar on South-South and triangular cooperation for tobacco control. Before we begin, and before I turn it over to some colleagues over at the Framework Convention Secretariat, I'd like to just provide a quick run-through of some practical considerations. So your microphones right now are all muted by default. That's to avoid too much background noise coming into the webinar. However, we very much want this webinar to be interactive. Of course, that's the nature of South-South. And you can use question box in the webinar control panel to ask questions throughout and at any time during the webinar. And we're going to be stopping at key junctures along the way to field a handful of questions, and we'll probably also carve out some time at the end of the webinar for an interactive discussion. Now, we'll be showing PowerPoint slides today. If you want to see those slides in full screen mode, you can use that little blue monitor icon that you see on the side of your webinar control panel. Now, if that control panel becomes minimized at any point during the webinar, you can enlarge it again by using the orange arrow, which you also see on the side of your control panel. Finally, just to note, this webinar is being recorded, so in case you experience technical issues or have to leave early for some reason, we will be sharing the webinar afterwards. And with that, I will turn it over to, I believe, Carmen over at the Framework Convention Secretariat. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roy, and welcome everybody to this first webinar of the South-South and Triangular project on Article 5.3 of the WHO Framework Convention for Tobacco Control. Just to start, just allow me to give a brief explanation of the origin of this project. Last year, the Convention Secretariat, in collaboration with UNDP, organized a South-South and Triangular meeting, which was generously hosted by Uruguay. We had 22 countries that participated in this meeting, and the idea was to match those parties in need of assistance with those that could provide assistance in the implementation of different aspects of the Convention. There were a number of topics that were discussed, and a number of projects emerged as a result of this meeting. The project that we are discussing now on cooperation in tobacco control governance was one of them. Brazil, Iran, and Moldova offered to provide support to Guatemala, Panama, and Ethiopia on setting up a multisectoral national coordinating mechanism for tobacco control. As part of this project, an easy platform has been established, which contains a library with files and detailed information about the multisectoral coordinating mechanism in these three countries, as well as a number of relevant publications. In this webinar today, first we'll have UNDP, which will make a short presentation on Article 5.2 of the FCTC. Then Brazil, Iran, and Moldova will present the national experiences, and this will then be followed by questions and answers. As Roy mentioned to us before, we would like to make this interactive. We want everybody to participate in this webinar so as to get the most out of it. So without any further delay, I think we can start with the presentations, and I would like to invite Dudley Talton from UNDP to talk to us about implementing Article 5.2 of the WHO FCTC. Over to you, Dudley.
Great. Thanks, guys. Let me first apologies because I'm at the World Health Assembly where it's a madhouse as usual, and it's going to be relatively loud and there'll be some background noise. But also I'm going to have to pull up the slides and we can share my screen. But let me get the slides first. Okay. Okay, Roy, you can go ahead. Oh, I have to push it. Okay, so this won't be entirely new for everybody, but essentially just to skip some of the slides that were presented last month at the Sustainable Measures Working Group and just get to a little bit of what we're planning for the toolkit we want to produce, and for which it would be great to have this group contribute to by collecting your best practices. So I will go to the quick outline. We'll look at the background. The presentation we based mostly on the findings of the paper that we've just published with the Convention Secretariat on tobacco control governance in Africa, with a focus on Article 5.2a. Now, the research for this, well, I'll get into the findings, but essentially the two objectives of this are to do some research and find out what are the lessons and experiences in Africa, how those parties are doing and implementing Article 5.2a. And then objective 2 is to come up with recommendations based on that for what are the best practices for institutionalizing NCMs and tobacco control focal points. So the first part obviously is Africa specific, but the second objective and the recommendations we're finding as we went through the process were globally relevant. And so there's no reason to look at these just as African recommendations. These are very likely to inform the best practices of the toolkit that we do for global application, which is why I think it's worth sharing with everyone today. Here are the findings. Essentially, I think on my screen half of it's blocked, and it may be on yours as well, but essentially a snapshot of how countries are doing in terms of Article 5.2a based on the latest FCTC reporting. Generally, the picture is pretty good. Most countries have, almost every party has at least a focal point. Most have a mechanism and a focal point. So then the question is, sure, some countries need help establishing an NCM, and even those ones who have established it, we need to make sure that they're functioning properly and that all the structures are in place for them to meet their terms of reference and to meet the obligations in 5.2a. Next slide. These are just the general findings. We've broken down into a few domains and principles for these findings. Leadership was a key component, looking at the institutional leadership and the characteristics. The composition, looking at the different options the countries are choosing for the size of the national coordination mechanism, who's involved in the membership, what levels of representation there are, and how effective or ineffective they are in excluding the industry from participation. It's also important to look at the lines of authority and statutory power, whether there is sustainable funding for these NCMs, what levels of funding is required, and generally whether financing these NCMs is a problem. What linkages there are to international and regional structures as well. And then finally, becoming more and more relevant, how does this fit into a broader non-communicable disease agenda, as well as into the broader Sustainable Development Goal agenda. So here's on the range of agencies or ministries that are found in most NCMs. We've put the ones in green where really these ones almost have to be included. They generally are in every case. The ones in blue, it's a very good idea to have these representative from these to be members of the NCM, and in a couple of places the ones in orange were included as well, and depending on the country context it may be beneficial to have them included as well. Recommendations. These all are very common sense. They're very intuitive. We found this is why when I say it's applicable globally, there's no way that these recommendations wouldn't fit to just about any national context. The tobacco control focal point should sit in the health ministry, be a part of the health ministry, should be, have the requisite technical expertise and that have enough of their time to devote to tobacco control duties. That shouldn't be someone who has this as a 10% of their portfolio while doing 5 or 6 other things. There needs to be a plan and a clear strategy for funding the NCM. The NCM in the tobacco control, oh sorry, this is just for focal points, yeah, so the funding for the focal points should be guaranteed and reliable, should come from national resources, and should be fixed. Number 3, the institutional stature. The focal point needs to be able to convene other ministries to come to the NCM meetings and to be able to get their attention when a problem arises. If you have someone sitting at too low a level, that becomes a problem. And also the person needs to be qualified to handle representational duties externally. This generally is the case. I think we just need to reinforce that this has to be sort of a minimum standard written into the policies. And then one issue that comes up again and again, as you saw on the last slide, is how do we fit this within broader NCD mandates? You have a tobacco control focal point. Is that person involved in broader NCD discussions? Is it an NCD focal point? We would say this person needs, each country should have at least one full-time equivalent working in the Ministry of Health on tobacco control who acts as a focal point to liaise with other partners. But the more links there are to the broader NCD agenda and processes, the stronger it will be. I'll probably speed up a little bit. So the recommendations for NCMs, get them established at the highest level possible. There's a couple of models. One is sort of an interministerial council where you have heads of ministries who meet regularly or a cabinet of ministers, and then the NCM generally is a more technical body with working level people, maybe chaired and headed with focal points of ministers, but with the normal day-to-day coordination work carried out at a technical level. Number 2, representation from across governments and across different parts of society. You need to make sure that you have a representative, responsive, and participatory approach to it. The terms of reference for the NCMs should be very clear, and there needs to be a code of behavior for all members, especially one that clearly lays out the do's and do nots for interaction with the tobacco industry. And likewise, the rules of procedure should be clear for all NCM meetings. The minutes should be published, in a reasonable time frame afterwards, and these should be made as publicly available as possible. And overall recommendations for both. The focal point should, of course, play a key role in the NCM. Transparency should be the order of the day, and the reporting should be comprehensive and accurate and timely as well. Here's the presentation, or the slide where we were talking about our project. We presented this at the Sustainable Measures Working Group. Here's the first look at the plan that we're devising with, you can see with the FCTC Secretariat, UNDP, and also with the Framework Convention Alliance to look at what are the 4 steps you need to establish an NCM. We've broken it down into 2 political aspects and 2 technical aspects. I don't want to spend too much time on this because the countries on this webinar are relatively advanced in this, but essentially you need to make sure you have enough political buy-in. You need to develop a formal agreement that includes the mandate, the rules of procedure, all the paperwork and structures you need for it. Technical aspects, then you have an actual launch to get it going, and then you make sure that there's an ongoing process for capacity development of all members in the NCM. Here's a list of, we've identified 11 tools that we think that we'll put together as part of a toolkit. And this is something that we hope for your help on, and it certainly helps already with the documents that you've shared with the rules of procedure and the terms of reference for the NCMs. But essentially, there's some sectoral briefing notes we're working on that anticipate the arguments against tobacco control that are generally made by non-health ministries. So when we go to a country and meet with the Ministry of Economy or a Ministry of Commerce, they tend to prioritize arguments that respond to issues of employment generation and these things, and not look at tobacco control in the broader view. So essentially, we know what kind of arguments are made against increased tobacco control coordination. We're anticipating them, and we want to have these what we call cheat sheets or sectoral briefings for you to use at country level to precede these arguments and respond to them. Going down the list, we won't go through all 11, but essentially we want to have all the tools together, even down to the invitation letter for convening the first meeting with a proposed agenda. So if a country is completely lost, and that's who we're sort of targeting at this level, then we could go to them with a package that they adapt to their needs and are able to get up and running relatively quickly. Thanks, that's all. I'm sorry for too much detail, but I'm looking forward to hearing the other experiences. Thanks.
Hello, thank you very much, Kathy, for your presentation. If anybody has any questions, please write them on the chat box, and we'll be answering them as we receive them. Maybe at the end of all the presentations, that would be more practical. But if you have any specific presentation now for that, question for that, you can please type it on the chat box. We'll just wait for 2-3 minutes to see if there are any questions. Well, maybe people want to think about it, and we'll have time. So, if so, I think we can continue with the next presentation. May I invite Tania Cavalcante from the Ministry of Health of Brazil. She's going to talk to us about the experience of Brazil on the composition of the National Coordinating Mechanism. So, Tania, if you're ready, please go ahead.
Hello for everybody. Greetings from Brazil, for the Convention Secretariat, for the UNDP representative, and for other colleagues, panelists. I was asked to share our experience with the multi-sectorial mechanism, specifically on the composition of this multi-sectorial mechanism for FCTC implementation in Brazil. Next, please. Eu que passo aqui? Okay. Thank you. I was asked to talk on the regarding the composition, on the size of the mechanism, multi-sectorial mechanism, membership, representation, tobacco industry, and civil society representation. So these are the items that I will address in this presentation. Next, please. Okay, thank you. Before talking on specifically on the multi-sectorial mechanism, I would like just to present very fast the central frame of tobacco control governance in Brazil. We can say that there is two big frames that are linked. We have a sectorial mechanism that is related to cross-cutting tobacco control in health agenda. This means networking with health offices in states and municipalities in order to cover all states and municipalities, and trying to put in all states and municipalities' agenda, health office agenda, the issue of smoking cessation, education, mobilization to support some measures of FCTC in Brazil. There is another networking within the agenda health that's related to sanitary surveillance in states and municipalities that is led by ANVISA. That's national agency responsible for sanitary surveillance, and that deals with tobacco product regulation and the inspection of legislation compliance. The other frame is the multi-sectorial mechanism. That means cross-cutting tobacco control in non-health agenda. This is the National Commission for FCTC Implementation that we name CONIC in Brazil. We now are going to talk specifically on this multi-sectorial mechanism. Next, please. So regarding size, membership, and representation. Next, please. This commission was created in 2003 by a presidential decree. At the very beginning, this commission, we have only 9 sectors of the government represented in it. Over the years, with the evolution of FCTC implementation in Brazil, CONIC itself recognized the need to incorporate other sectors of government, and now we have 18 different sectors formally represented in CONIC. The Minister of Health is the chair of this commission, and the National Cancer Institute plays the role of its executive secretariat. The General Director of INCA acts as co-chair of this commission as well. So the role of this commission is to promote FCTC ratification, because when it was created, Brazil hadn't ratified FCTC yet, and implement a national agenda to accomplish FCTC obligations. It's like it's expressed in the decree. The next, please. Next, please. So here we have the view of the composition of this commission. Considering the classification used in the document, Tobacco Control Governance in Sub-Saharan Africa, we can say that the essential ministries and agencies for CONIC are ANVISA, that's the National Agency on Sanitary Surveillance, the Attorney General in Brazil, because we have many litigations in Brazil, Ministry of Finance, that is the responsible for implementing FCTC Article 6 and part of Article 15, it's taxes, policies, and tackling illicit trade. We can say as well Minister of Foreign Affairs, that it's responsible for every step related to international cooperation, negotiation on FCTC. Minister of Agrarian Development, Minister of Agriculture, and Minister of Environment, and the Minister of Health itself. The other minister, we can say ministers and secretariats and agencies, we can say that we can classify as ministry and agencies that should nearly always be included, considering the document Tobacco Control Governance in Sub-Saharan Africa, the frame that we used. Regarding the representation, these representatives are formally nominated by their ministers in a memorandum sent to the Minister of Health, as he is the chair of CONIC. There is no rule on the hierarchic level of CONIC representatives. It depends on the priority given by that ministry to tobacco agenda. Generally speaking, the representative of ministries that have a more prominent role in FCTC implementation are from high-level hierarchy in their ministries. For example, the representative from Ministry of Agrarian Development is the coordinator of the National Program of Diversification in Tobacco Growing Areas, a very important program as Brazil is the second tobacco producer and the largest exporters of tobacco leaves. They had another example. The head of international affairs of Attorney General is the representative of this organ in CONIC. And the head of social matters is the representative of Ministry of Foreign Affairs as well in CONIC. Periodically, the president of CONIC sends formal letters to other ministries to confirm their representatives or to nominate another one to replace the previous one representative. When the Executive Secretariat of CONIC prepare the draft of these letters, we use to highlight what is expected from that ministry for FCTC implementation, and somehow we try to drive the nomination to areas from that ministry that would be more useful for CONIC work. Another point that I'd like to highlight here in the issue of composition representative, regarding the representation, is an issue that we have been discussed for a long time within CONIC. How can we allow the participation of representative from legislative power? This is still an open discussion, considering that many of the FCTC measures depend on the improvement of existing legislation or on creating new laws. So CONIC has been discussing on this issue informally, internally, to include representatives from legislative power without opening a flank for tobacco industry interference, because we know that in the National Congress there are a lot of lobbyists of tobacco industry, so we'd like to have a more close contact with the legislative power in CONIC, but we need to be very, very careful with the possibility of having some advocate of tobacco industry interests. We did not find a solution yet. We stayed with the model of channeling our relationship with National Congress through the parliamentary advisor of Minister of Health. But a part of this decision, we from Executive Secretariat of CONIC have established some good relationship with some legislators that are FCTC supportive. The next, please. The next, please. I'm going to talk now on the tobacco industry and civil society, but I will start with the representation from civil society. Regarding the participation of civil society in CONIC, there is no formal representation from civil society in CONIC. Why? There are many reasons for this situation. In 2003, at the time when CONIC was created, we were facing a strong opposition for the ratification of FCTC mobilized by tobacco industry front organizations, mainly the ones linked to tobacco production. There were strong pressures against FCTC ratification in the National Congress and within the ministers' cabinets. These organizations, these front organizations mainly made this pressure. There was a lot of pressure from these groups to be part of CONIC. They used to state that FCTC was a threat to growers' livelihoods, and they should be part of the discussion on FCTC ratification and implementation in CONIC. And they used to say that the government couldn't decide for their destiny behind closed doors. The solution we found that time was to have a governmental commission only, but open to dialogue with stakeholders. And our strategy was to try later to have on board representation from civil society that were FCTC supportive without allowing tobacco industry interference or indirect participation. We have discussed this issue many times in CONIC and we didn't find a good solution yet. We still suffer pressure from tobacco industry front organizations to be part of CONIC. For example, the Brazilian Tobacco Growers Association, AFUBRA, that's linked to International Tobacco Growers Association, that is supported by British American Tobacco, is one of the main organizations, front organizations that pressure the government to be on board of CONIC. We understand that the current method of screening if someone has or not a conflict of interest to be part of CONIC is not safe enough to prevent the participation of tobacco industry organization. In Brazil, there are many organizations beyond FUBRA that are tobacco industry front organizations that are maintained by tobacco industry. So this is still an open question in CONIC, and we are trying to solve. Please, the next slide, please. The big question is how to allow representatives of civil society to be formally part of CONIC while preventing infiltration of tobacco industry front organizations. So I have said that screening is not, we consider is not a safe way to do that. We can use it, but we cannot trust it completely. And now we are analyzing inside of CONIC a solution, maybe creating a council of experts on tobacco control that could support CONIC. It's a possibility that to have on board the main organizations and academy people that are leading with tobacco control in Brazil without allowing the tobacco industry participation. The next, please. Next, please. Next slide, please. Regarding tobacco industry, the decree that created CONIC states its obligation to hear and dialogue with stakeholders, what includes civil society and representatives of tobacco supply chain. Any stakeholder can request formal hearings to CONIC, what uses to happen during ordinary meetings of CONIC, if there is approval of the members of CONIC previously. Now we are testing regular open meetings because these hearings, it's not happening the whole meeting. It's only a momentum of the meeting. We can open for the hearing of civil society or representatives of tobacco supply chain. And now we are testing another model of how we can interact a little more with the stakeholders. So we are trying to put in practice open meetings model before every ordinary meetings of CONIC. We made 2 meetings like that last year, and now we are analyzing the pros and the cons of keeping this model. The next slide, please. Now we are going to talk on the mechanism, the next slide, please, of protection of CONIC from tobacco industry interference. We have we have the rules of procedure that we have published in 2011 that includes a declaration of conflict of interest for CONIC members. And we have also published formally ethical guidelines for CONIC members in order to try to educate the CONIC members on their relationship with tobacco industry. So it was approved by executive order. We understand that these 2 mechanisms are important but are not sufficient. They are important to educate on this matter and to create a social pressure on CONIC members regarding tobacco industry relationship. this mechanism, we understand that do not fully prevent that some members of CONIC being advocates of tobacco industry interests. The next, please. And we have had some not good experience with this situation, and we are now trying to improve this issue of protection from tobacco industry. We are, for example, trying to introduce the reference to Article 5.3 in the letter to be sent by Minister of Health when asking to other ministers to confirm or to indicate a new representative to CONIC, using the same model recently adopted by FCTC Secretariat when asking governments to nominate representatives for expert groups or working groups. In our understanding, it can be one more way to disseminate this obligation, this crucial obligation with FCTC, to high-level government representatives and at the same time disseminate the culture of seeing tobacco industry as part of the problem and not the solution of tobacco control. Thanks very much and greetings from Brazil again.
Thank you very much, Tanya. We have a question here from Ian Salaru from Moldova for you, and his question is, did you try to change the composition of Coordination Council to exclude tobacco industry? So Tanya, if you would like to answer.
Okay, I'd like just to have a clarification. When you mean Coordination Council, you mean the National Commission for FCTC Implementation, is it?
I imagine that's what he means, yes.
Okay, because yes, we have tried to change very much. Not the composition, not the representation itself, but we tried, for example, to replace some members of CONIC that were not so very in line with the FCTC principles. We had, for example, in 2010, a situation where one member of a Brazilian delegation in, that was representative of the Minister of External Trade in Brazil, we have the denunciation that she was, for example, she was in that COP4, she was passing some information from the closed meetings. So this person is not anymore in CONIC. We had a formal complaint, we have a formal process, administrative process, and she had to answer some kind of inquiry from administrative inquiry. So it was educative for other members of CONIC, but I repeat that it's not enough because we still have some people not behaving like we would like to not in line with FCTC goals and FCTC principles. We are trying, for example, the Minister of Health has sent a letter to the Minister of that that was not so good behavior, and we didn't have any solution for that yet. So we have some kind of concerns to try to put these people in line with FCTC. So it's good to have, for example, pressure from civil society. We have a good partnership with civil society that make a kind of surveillance and a kind of these behaviors, and it's very important to have external pressure in order to try to align these people with the FCTC principles.
Thank you, Tanya. We don't have any more questions for the other participants, but maybe I would like to ask you a question, and that is, I imagine not all sectors or not all ministries show the same interest or are as involved the same way. How do you manage to keep that interest or to make them feel that this is part of the business also?
Carmen, did you make a question to me? I didn't hear very well. If it's, can you repeat your question, please?
Sure, Tanya. My question is, how do you ensure that the different government sectors that for part of CONIC are involved and feel that this is the issue, the business, and they're engaged? Because I imagine not all of them are engaged in the same way. How do you manage to get them interested?
This is not I'm just laughing because it's not an easy task. We have some changes, some periodical change of people. We have some people that are not very keen with the process. So we used to make visits to these cabinets, to these people in order to try to help them with the information they need on their role on the FCTC implementation. We make a kind of working groups on some themes, some issues that is related to CONIC. For example, we had, not now, but we had a working group on diversification process. We used to get together civil society that is, there is some kind of expertise on the issue with people from that ministry. One very good example that we had on the engagement of one member of the Ministry of Finance, for example, was to engage this person in the whole process of the discussion on Article 6. So it's important to that person to participate on the discussions from the very beginning on the guidelines for implementation of articles, specific articles of FCTC. We don't have a formula for do that, but our role is to make people participative, to facilitate the work of these people, to give these people all the information they need to make their work. And when we go to Brasilia, because we are in Rio de Janeiro, but every week almost we go to Brasilia, we used to visit some cabinets to reinforce the importance of their role in FCTC implementation, showing their results. For example, we had a study very recently that was published here in Brazil that showed important decrease in smoking cessation, the sim smoke model. I don't know if everybody knows, that showed that the big contribution of increasing taxes in reducing prevalence and as well reducing mortality. So this is a way to also reinforce the commitment of some areas of government. But we have some difficulties. Some areas are not attending as we'd like that they would attend even the meetings. And we go there and try to ask for their participation. And now, for example, we have made some new letters from the chair of CONIC to send to all ministers to ask for their participation, to confirm the representative or to indicate a new representative, and reinforcing the role of that ministry or secretariat or agency on implementing FCTC in Brazil. So this is how we deal with this situation, Carmen.
Thank you very much, Tanya, for that. We see that there are two hands up, one from Mirta and one from Francoise. I guess you want to make questions. We're going to see if we can manage. Usually we had asked you to write on the chat box, but we're going to see if we manage to unmute your mic so that you can speak. So, Mirta, please go ahead.
Hello, everyone. I wrote the question, but I would like to know, probably you said before, how frequently the CONICI meets, and if CONICI also have extraordinary sessions, Tanya. Thank you.
Thank you. Who is speaking? I couldn't see.
Ms. Mirta Molinari.
Hi, Mirta. How are you? We have every 3 months we have ordinary meetings of CONIC. We have a previous agenda with items that are in discussion, are of interest of Brazil, and we have some. We have the rule that if someone wants an extraordinary meeting, they can ask for, or even ask from Executive Secretariat, we can propose extraordinary meetings. And we have, for example, this year, much more frequent meetings because we are in preparation of the delegation of Brazil for COP7. So in the second semester, we have a series of meetings, open meetings to discuss the documents that will be provided by Convention Secretariat, and then meetings, only CONIC meetings to discuss and to make the proposal of the Brazilian positions on the issues that we will need decisions for COP7. So we have, in general speaking, we have 4 ordinary meetings a year, and we have open meetings before these ordinary meetings. And we have also the COP preparation years, we have much more meetings in order to discuss and to prepare the Brazilian delegation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tanya. I think we're going to move to the next presentation, and then there will be time at the end for questions. We've seen there are a few there in the chat box now, but we'll move to the next presentation, and then we'll address all the questions at the end. So the next presentation will be from Iran, from Behzad Barisadeh, and he's going to talk to us about the experience of Iran in leadership and funding of the National Coordinated Mechanism. So Behzad, please go ahead.
Hello. Hello everybody, this is Behzad from Iran. Greeting from Iran. I would like to thank the Convention Secretariat to provide this opportunity to share the experience on the implementation of the Article 5.2, and special thanks to colleagues from UND who share their experience and guidance in this regard. I'm going to speak about the role of the multinational multi-sector coordination mechanism, implementation of the on the leadership and funding. Next, please. Okay. So, give some information ratification and tobacco control in Iran. We signed it and ratified in October 2005. 2006. Convention, Framework Convention on Tobacco Control draft during the negotiation of the convention. We draft the National Tobacco and as an act. This act see, let me adjust the screen to see the slide. After the ratification of executive bylaw to the framework, the national tobacco from the obligation of the convention.
Hi, Behzad.
Article. Yes.
This is Roy in New York with UNDP. The audio is cutting out a bit on the webinar, and I just wanted to see if there was anything on your end that we might be able to do to tighten that up. But if not, please do proceed.
Am I here? My voice is good.
It's
a slide.
It's cutting in a little bit in and out. I don't know if maybe we're having an internet connection.
No.
But you know, please do proceed.
Please go ahead, and we'll try to see if we can hear you.
Please. Can I move to the
next slide, please?
But I really clear and good quality. Right.
Behzad, we're really having problems hearing you. I think maybe we move to the next presentation. In the meantime, maybe you can check your microphone, or maybe the connection gets a bit better later on. So if that's all right with you, I think we should move to the next presenter from Moldova. So is that right? Ian Salaru, could you please now talk to us from Moldova and the experience of Moldova about the statutory power of the National Coordinating Mechanism, its fitting within the NCD agenda and the international linkages? So as soon as the presentation is up, there we are.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Ian, yes, please go ahead.
Okay, so good evening to everyone, where it's already evening, and good day to Brazil and to Latin America. And thank you, Carmen, Rodrigo, and Roy for the opportunity to participate at this webinar. I will try to be brief, to share with our experience what is related to National Coordination Council on Tobacco Control. First slide, please. I want to start with a little history that we had in mind to establish such a mechanism when we developed first national program on tobacco control in 2011. And from the beginning we proposed the National Coordination Council. At those moments we had very many opponents, including inside of the Ministry of Health, that you know will be problematic to coordinate. So we will assume many responsibilities. Maybe it's better to have or to limit to national focal point instrument. And I remember at those time the program was the government for approval, and we had a sub-regional meeting on FCTC implementation in Chisinau in November 2011, and with advice of Tibor and Dr. Nico Gosean, we succeed to convince, starting from Minister of Health and the Prime Minister, that this is necessary and we should have a standalone National Coordination Committee, but not as a group or as a part of a large health committee which were proposed from the beginning. And next slide. And finally, by the government decision 100, we consider that it was a relevant number. From February 2011, government adopted the first national program on tobacco control for 5 years. And according to this decision, was set the National Coordination Council on Tobacco Control, which is chaired by the Deputy Prime Minister for Social Protection Problems. And also by the same decision was adopted the statute and the composition of National Coordination Council. Next slide. Also a few words about the power of National Coordination Council. Already having the experience that some political leaders put under doubts the authority of this council, we decided to include, Ministry of Health to include in the lawful amendment of existing law on tobacco control. And the Parliament last year, almost exactly 1 year ago, accepted to include in the tobacco control law that should be established by the government a National Coordination Council on Tobacco Control. And in this case, we prevent different political influence which can appear in the case with if will remain only under the governmental decision. Next slide. Even the Coordination Council is mentioned in the status that is created as an advisory body without, being a separate legal body to coordinate all the necessary activities and efficiently to organize actions in tobacco control and to counteract the negative effects on tobacco consumption on health. Its decisions are disseminated and accepted for implementation by all relevant authorities in the Republic of Moldova. So we have now some example on one ministry or agency put under the DABS, the authority of National Coordination Council. Also, Council's mission is to enforce communication and intersectorial collaboration in strengthening the legal framework for tobacco control and to establish such a mechanism to make more effective tobacco control activities. Next slide. About the frequency of the sessions of tobacco control of the Coordination Council is mentioned by the status that should be minimum every 6 months, but sessions are organized more often just for this year, we had already 2 sessions. The latest was yesterday and was dedicated to entering into 4th new provision of tobacco control law, total ban of smoking in indoor places. And the other question was accession to the protocol on the elimination of illicit trade on tobacco products. Also, decision within 5 days, the latest should be adopted by the chair and by the secretary and to be disseminated for implementation by all members. About the composition, so council consists of 23 members. I already mentioned that the chair is the Deputy Prime Minister, the Deputy Chair is the Deputy Minister of Health, and the Secretary from National Center of Public Health, myself, so I'm the Secretary of this Council, also includes 9 members as Deputy Ministers from relevant authorities, agriculture, economy, finance, international affairs, informational technology and communications, of education, youth and sports, social protection, and culture. 5 members are directors of different services and institutions, such as Customs Service, Tax Service, National Health Insurance Company, Academy of Science, and Medical University. Next slide. Other 3 members are directors or members of relevant media institutions such as National Radio, National Public TV Channel, and Media Coordination Council. And 3 members we have from civil society, 2 from NGOs, and 1 from Health Trade Union organization. So all sectors we consider that are represented in the council, excepting tobacco industry. Also, different other sectors or institutions can be invited, and are invited to present some information or reports. Next slide. I already mentioned some of the main responsibilities of tobacco, of the Council on or the Coordination Council on Tobacco Control. The main function is to coordinate implementation of public policies in tobacco control. Another one to ensure stakeholder participation in the implementation of national policies. Also, promotion and implementation of legislation and other public policies on tobacco control. Next slide. Other function is to promote intersector partnership between government, international and non-governmental authorities. Also, to create conditions for public authorities control on trade of tobacco products, and also to ensure effective dialogue between government and non-governmental authorities in Moldova and abroad. Also to coordinate intersectoral development and adjustment of the legislation in according to FCTC obligation and association agreement with European Union. Next slide. How national coordination mechanism in tobacco control is fitting into non-communicable disease prevention agenda. I have to mention that very recently, by the governmental decision 43, of 6 April 2016 was adopted National Action Plan on NCD prevention, which is also for the first time in accordance to WHO proposed Global Action Plan on NCD prevention and control. So according to this decision and with plan, also was established a new National Coordination Council on NCD control, which will cover areas of alcohol control, nutrition, and physical activity, and also health promotion. So generally this council will not cover area of tobacco control, and at the end this council absorbed few council already exist, which we had on alcohol control, on nutrition, on health promotion, on reducing iron and folic acid deficiencies, and so on. And all this council merged into one on NCD control, but due to the fact that the Coordination Council on Tobacco Control is already under the umbrella of the law, will remain standalone, but we consider that we'll have all opportunities and conditions for collaboration between these two councils. We'll have a good connection with council, taking into account, I mean, human aspect, that the chair, the deputy chair, and the secretary of this new council are the same persons as as the chair, deputy chair, and the secretary for National Coordination Council on Tobacco Control. So we will follow that the aspects which are related to tobacco control will find the exact place in new Coordination Council, also taking into account that the action plan on NCD prevention also provides some new actions which we decided that it's time for them to be included, which we miss at the time of the adoption of program on tobacco control. Next slide. About the international connection of a National Coordination Council on Tobacco Control, at the old session of the Council, as a permanent invitee representative of WHO country office, and also we offer to them the possibility to present or to intervene into the discussions. Also, we are inviting, when necessary, representatives from UN office. We are promoting one UN policy, and also from UNICEF, when discussing the situation on tobacco consumption, tobacco control policies in the educational sector, I mean school, preschool institution, and also universities. And from this year also we establish a good collaboration with the Swiss International Cooperation Agency. In our country started an SDC project on preventing non-communicable disease in Moldova. So the main goal is to reduce burden of disease. Also, I think it's not necessary to mention all activities and support which we are receiving from the Secretariat. I mean, guidelines on implementation of the articles of FCTC convention. And one collaboration which I forgot to mention is with Tobacco-Free Kids. So they are supporting us a lot with development of informational materials. We already this year developed and distributed not only within the members of Coordination Council but also within all relevant authorities, organizations, informational materials, leaflet, guidances on implementation of the provision of the new tobacco control law. So I can say that we have quite good international collaboration and support. What you see also at the end of the slide is the banner on our web page, which is dedicated on tobacco control issues, and where everyone can access and can obtain all necessary, not only information which is related to legal documents, but also to informational materials, to activities, to intervene, to put questions. We established a hotline with dedicated to tobacco control, which is active not only from stationary telephones but also from mobile telephones. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ian, for your presentation. We have here a couple of questions for you. One is from Laurent Hubert from FCA, and his question is the Health Trade Union a non-government organization, or is it linked to the government trade ministry? Over to you, Ian.
Thank you for the question. It's a good question. So we selected the most active NGOs, and as I mentioned, we have the most active NGOs. One is the association Young and Free. They are the best, I can say, our supporters and partners in implementing different activities such as meetings, flash mobs, training, and so on. And they really demonstrated their dedication and those fact that they have a good authority within other NGOs. And the second one is the Center for Health Policies and Analysis, which is also an NGO, and its function is to make analysis of policies and to develop some advices for ministries on health protection areas. And also I have to mention that this NGO is implementing project with the support of Tobacco-Free Kids in Moldova. So they're also our supporters, and we have good mutual collaboration with them.
Okay, thank you very much. We have another question, and this one comes from Ivona Tus, also from FCA, and she says, in the process of adopting the law decision on national tobacco control coordination, did you see any industry interference? For example, something similar as happened in Brazil, like phone groups of industry trying to become members of this national mechanism? Did you have this experience in Moldova?
yes, we saw such experience at the stage of promoting with the National Program on Tobacco Control. It was at those times the insistence of the Minister of Agriculture to have on board also the director of the local tobacco factory, where still the state is the main owner, which the state owned more than 90% of all premises, I mean of all actives of this factory, and to protect the interest of the local producers, it was intensively promoted the participation also of this person which I mentioned, the director of tobacco factory. Now we are not at those stage other attempts to include representatives of international tobacco industry, but at the end we demonstrate that anyway the Ministry of Agriculture should collect all questions which are related to industry and to present if necessary to the government. But according to the Article 5, we insist that this prohibited interference of tobacco industry on setting or developing health policies. And at the end, they are not members of the council.
Thank you very much. We have a few more questions, but I think we're going to try to connect again with Iran, just to make sure that we give Basad another opportunity. So, Basad, are you still there? Can we try again to see if the connection is a bit better now?
Okay. Can you hear me?
Now we can hear you. Let's see if we're lucky.
Okay. I hope the connection would be better to present my presentation.
It sounds much better now, so please go ahead.
Okay. I was in the second slide. Before that, yes, this one. Okay, the next slide, please. Okay. As I was talking about the National Coordination Mechanism and National Tobacco Control Act, we ratified the National Act on Tobacco Control after ratification of the Convention. And based on the Article 1 of the Act, to plan for campaign against consumption of tobacco product and for maintaining public health, the national headquarters of controlling and campaigning against tobacco product, hereinafter referred to HQ as HQ, shall be established in which following member participate. Please next slide. Can you hear me? Okay. The membership of the HQ are in the level of the ministers. So there are 4 ministers, Minister of Health, Minister of Culture and Islamic Guidance, Minister of Education, and Minister of Industry, Mine and Commerce, Commander of Police, and a representative of one of non-governmental organizations related to tobacco control elected by the Ministry of Health and Medical Education. These are the permanent member of the HQ, and we have also 2 observers. Two members of Health and Treatment Commission of the Islamic Consultative Council, the Parliament, and also the head of the Islamic Republic of Iran Broadcasting. These are observer of this HQ. Next slide, please. This is a flow chart of the National Tobacco Control Headquarters, as you see, and I explained the previous slides. Next, please. So, the National Coordination Mechanism of Tobacco Control is the HQ, the headquarters of tobacco control in Iran, which was established based on the Act in 2007 and serves as a national coordination mechanism for tobacco control. Next slide, please. Next, please. Okay. Again, according to the Article 1 of the Act, in Note 1, the Secretariat of the HQ shall be settled in the Ministry of Health and Medical Education. And in Note 2, 6 months performance report of the HQ shall be submitted to the Minister's Cabinet and the Health Commission of the Parliament. And in Note 3, the representative of government bodies related to subject are invited to HQ sessions at discretion of HQ's head without any voting. Next slide, please. So the National Coordination Mechanism is a National Tobacco Control Headquarters headed by Minister of Health, and the Secretary of this HQ is Deputy for Health in the Ministry of Health, and the Secretariat of the HQ is Head of the Environmental and Occupational Health Department. Next, please. In Article 2 of the Act, the duties of HQs was described as to plan for campaign against consumption of tobacco product and for maintaining public health. The HQ is obliged to provide executive procedure concerning definition, scope, and feature of advertisement, providing and ratification of educational program and research with cooperation of related bodies, and determination of kind of messages, warning pictures, and plans concerning the adverse social, economic, and health effect of tobacco products and time period of insertion them. All resolution of the HQ are enforceable after approving by the President. So after each session of the HQ, the resolution will be approved by the President, and after approval of the President, all of resolutions are enforceable and obligatory. Next, please. And as I said before, the Secretariat of the National Tobacco Control Headquarters is established in the Department of Environmental Health. This Secretariat is obliged to do necessary examination on possible recommendation to propose to the HQ and drafting the minute in the HQ meeting, and also follow up the implementation of the resolution of the HQ, as well as establishment of the national and provincial technical tobacco control working groups, and also necessary coordination with relevant agencies and inviting them in the relevant meetings. So between each HQ, the Secretariat of the HQ should have some other meetings with relation to any priorities and issues with other relevant organizations to provide necessary document for the HQ meetings. And also the Secretariat should prepare and submit the HQ report to the Parliament. Next please. And in continue, the other duty of the Secretariat are to do other issues which may have requested by the HQ and collect necessary information and required data in line with the implementation of the Act and relevant administrative regulations, for example, bylaw or etc. So the other duties are to coordinate administrative affairs relevant to implementation of tobacco control legislation with other relevant organizations, and to develop draft guidelines and a strategic plan and propose them to the HQ for consideration and approval. And also follow up to provide human resources, technical facilities, and funding for tobacco control. These are the duties of the Secretariat, which works under supervision of the national headquarters as a coordination mechanism. Next slide, please. Okay. As I mentioned before, one of the duties of the Secretariat is to establish national technical working groups. We have established 5 technical working groups with regard to the illicit tobacco trade prevention, which headed by the law enforcement force of in Iran, and also the other working group working on the determination of standards for production and importation of tobacco products, headed by the National Standard Organization. The other working group is related to issuing legal permission for tobacco selling and distribution, headed by Minister of Industry, Mine and Commerce. And also the other working group work on the determination of insertion of health warning for tobacco product, headed by Minister of Health. And the other working group, which is about the education, surveillance, and health promotion, is also headed by the Minister of Health. These are working groups working under the supervision of the headquarters and Secretariat of the headquarters. Next, please. This is the flow chart of the working group and the membership of each working groups. Next, please. And this is a flow chart of the Ministry of Health and the connection of HQ with the Minister and the Deputy for Health, which is Secretary of the HQ, and the position of the Environmental and Occupational Health Center as a Secretariat of the HQ, and other department under this Environmental and Occupational Health department. This is a flow chart. Please, next slide, please. With regard to tobacco control leadership, benefiting from the Health in All Policy Declaration of WHO, an active involvement in the process of negotiation on FCTC, involvement of Ministry of Health in this process, this organization serves as a leadership of tobacco control. The position of the Ministry of Health in the National Coordination Mechanism as a head of this mechanism is in a way that to protect public health against tobacco industries this position help this ministry to easily intervene with other relevant organization and connect with them to implement the obligations under the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. In the Ministry of Health, there is a great potential in primary healthcare network, and this ministry can use this opportunity to prevent, to do some prevention services from tobacco consumption, and also serve cessation services through this network. And also it has in the Department of Environmental Health, there are more than 6,000 environmental health inspectors that work under the supervision of the Secretariat of HQ, and as well as in the coordination mechanism, as I said, the Ministry of Health can have a good role in the leadership of tobacco control, among other related organizations. Next slide, please. And regarding the funding, like other issues related to coordination mechanism that's mentioned in the National Tobacco Control Act, the funding is also mentioned in the Article 8 of the Act. According to this article, the annual price of tobacco products shall increase 10% through increase in tax, and up to 2% of the whole amount of tax obtained from the tobacco products deposited to the Treasury account shall be allocated to the annual budget of the related public association and organizations, NGOs, to support and boost them to develop educational research and cultural programs for the purpose of preventing and fighting against tobacco consumption. And also in the Article 17 of the Act, the financial burden of implementation of this Act is covered by incomes resulting from the Article 8 that I mentioned before, and also Article 9 of the Act. In the Article 9 of the Act, the revenue is from the cessation services, considered from the cessation services, but this act is not, this article is not implemented so far because the cessation services is free of charge, and we cannot get any revenue from these services. And also the public the private sector is not active in this regard, so it has no any revenue for tobacco control from this article. But the main revenue mainly provided by the Article 8 from the taxation. And next slide, please. Next. And also in the budget law. In the budget law, each year a percentage of income from annual budget resulted from tobacco taxation allocate to the Minister of Health and other major agencies like Ministry of Education, Ministry of Sport and Youth, Ministry of Science, and other agencies to reimburse for tobacco control activities. Each year a specific amount of tax is considered for reimbursement of tobacco control for key major ministries. And we have also other funding regime to implement the convention and also the National Tobacco Control Act. Because of considering the coordination and cooperation approach of the HQ and involvement of all relevant agencies by this mechanism, many of governmental and non-governmental organizations allocate their budgets to the tobacco control program. I can specifically mention about some best practices of Ministry of Petroleum, which offer free of charge cessation services through the country for their staffs, and also municipalities that offer training program, cessation services, and monitoring surveillance with regard to implementation of the convention. Next, please. In conclusion, it's very important to have a supportive national legislation for national coordination mechanism. And also the leadership of Ministry of Health is very important in the coordination mechanism, because the health issue is not negotiable for each from the other organization and relevant agencies. And the necessity of establishing a national coordination mechanism in the National Tobacco Control Law, it should be legally binding, and it should involve relevant agencies in a permanent or observer members. And also we have to have a national tobacco control strategic plan or plan of action which define relevant agencies' duties under the tobacco WHO FCTC and national laws regulations. And also funding of tobacco control program, the revenues from taxation and legal requirements on reimbursement should be in the National Tobacco Control Act, which should be allocated for cessation services, for inspection, controlling systems, and education training activities, and also other issues related to implementation of the convention. I think my slide is finished. Thank you for your kind attention. If you have any question, I am at your disposal.
Thank you very much, Behzad, for your presentation, and finally we were able to hear you, so that's very good news. We have a question here from Fanny del Carmen Castillo Torres from Panama, and her question is about the inspection. How is the inspection conducted?
We have, as I mentioned before, we have more than 6,000 environmental health inspections through the country level. These inspectors are working under the supervision of the Environmental and Occupational Health Department, which is the Secretariat of the National Coordination Mechanism. These inspections are not directly connected with this Environmental Health Department, because we have a national primary health network. Because we have this network, each province has their own focal point for tobacco control. We consider focal point at the provincial level to connect in the territory of each University of Medical Sciences. We have more than 50 university of medical sciences through the country, and each university has a deputy of health. And in the deputy of health, they have a environmental health section, a unit. And in each environmental health unit, they have a focal point for tobacco control. So we can connect with them through the deputy of health in each university of medical sciences, and they routinely they supervise the public places and the distribution centers for tobacco products in cooperation with the other agencies like unions inspections and like police force. So in inspection usually do in a routine phase, which inspector go to the public place or distribution centers to comply to see any compliance with the Tobacco Control Act, and if they have any problem in implementation of the Act, they report to the judiciary system, and when the judiciary system issue the penalty for the owner of this place, so they go with the police force and unions to implement the National Tobacco Control Law, and they may close this center or the distribution center, or implement the law according to the judiciary decision.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We have a question from Luis Ricardo Cosman from Guatemala, and what he says is that the Ministry of Petroleum Corporation calls his attention. Do you see this kind of collaboration as something we could expand to other sectors, including the private entities?
For sure, yes. Because of the nature of the Ministry of Petroleum is a great, one of the greatest agencies through the country, national governmental agencies, and has lots of employees and employers through the country. With good cooperation of the Ministry of Health and this ministry, they provide cessation services for all staffs and families of these staffs, and for also it is not a permanent member of the HQ, but with good cooperation between the Ministry of Health and Ministry of Petroleum under the HQ cooperation, we did this good experience with them. But for private sector, the private sector is not good active in the area of cessation services in Iran. But we can work with them in the specific frame to make them more involved in the implementation of the National Tobacco Control Act, especially in the cessation services. But for other issues related to convention, usually the government sector work with the Ministry of Health to the country level.
Thank you very much for that. Now we have a question from Shoba John, and this one is for Moldova. He's asking, what is the average spending of non-health member ministries of Brazil and Moldova multi-sectoral mechanism on tobacco control activities? In this case, we'll pose it to Moldova.
Yeah.
Sorry, Carmen, can you repeat the question?
Sure. The question is, what is the average spending of non-health member ministries of Moldova's multi-sectoral mechanism on tobacco control activities? So what do the other non-health sectors, non-health ministries spend in the activities?
What is related to financial spend, I am not ready to answer, but what is related to the activities, they are responsible for their sectors according to the law. And in the law we have provision which mention the responsibility of the Minister of Internal Affairs, the Minister of Economy, Minister of Finance, Customs Service, also Tax Service, and the Ministry of Education. And more often, of course, if to analyze the percentage of reports which are presented at the session of National Coordination Council, I can say that the proportion is that at least of a third of them, or even a little bit more, are presented by the Minister of Health. Almost at the same level, Ministry of Internal Affairs, because especially now we are enforcing the provision of a new law, which many articles are implemented gradually. We started in September, entered into force new articles also from the 1st of January. Third stage will be from 31st of May. Next will be from 1st of January next year, and so on. But the majority, if to resume, so 2/3 we have from two ministries, Ministry of Health and Ministry of Internal Affairs, and 1/3 are reporting and information presented by the rest of participants, I mean from the rest of ministries. What is related to financing, for the moment the single financial source is state budget. For that, for tobacco control activities, where I have to mention especially activities for health promotion, for developing of informational materials, and also salaries to governmental employers. Additionally, we are supported by the Health Insurance Fund, which from this year we have established a cessation service, and partially is covered by Health Insurance Fund. Probably next year we'll extend the package of services for cessation. And the rest we have no other additional source of financing, as was mentioned by Iran, such as earmark taxation 2% to go for tobacco control activities. Other funds came from WHO country office in different activities, so in promoting different activities or populational surveys.
Thank you very much for that. Now we move back to Tanya, and we have a question again from Luis Ricardo Guzman from Guatemala. And his question is related to the trouble trying to fit with the civil society. One idea that they have considered is the inclusion of academia to represent civil society. And he's asking, what do you reckon about this?
Thank you for the question. We are considering to create a council of experts in order to have a group directly linked to National Commission that will include the academia as well. Not only the academia, but the civil society that are very, very keen and very, very active in Brazil to promote FCTC implementation. Because these civil societies, there are many civil societies that are not from the academy, but they have developed a very, very good expertise in tobacco control. So informally, these NGOs are already being like counselors of CONIC, but we would like to formalize it. So we understood that this will be a way to deal with the participation of civil society, including the academy, without allowing tobacco industry participation through non-civil front organizations of tobacco industry. So this is how we are trying to deal with that, including representative from academy.
Tanya, thank you very much for that. We have a question now for Moldova, and this comes from Isha Ali. And his question is, what specific support does UNICEF bring on board? Jan? Moldova?
Well, once again, I didn't...
Okay, I will... Ishaq Ali from Ghana, he wants to know the support that UNICEF brings to the board.
Support of UNICEF?
Yes, UNICEF.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you can tell.
The support of UNICEF is mainly moral one support, because they are not invited, as I said, on permanent base. On permanent base we have WHO, but mainly one is related to smoking prevalence and preventing measures in school and educational facilities. But I want to say that they are offering all necessary logistical support if necessary to organize meeting together with other authorities, I mean Ministry of Education, territorial authorities on educational and sport, and also on we are coordinating with them the text or the composition, the content of informational materials which are related to or are addressed to school children. For example, last year we organized during the in November during the National Tobacco Quit Day or Smoking Quit Day, a special hour for children on preventing tobacco consumption, and we cooperate in promoting this activity, I mean in editing materials and also in examining and adjusting of these materials which are addressed to school children.
Thank you very much for that. And we're going to have the last question because we're running out of time. And this question is from Francois Habiyareme from Rwanda. And this question is for Iran. And his question is, what are the main challenges that you faced at the initial step to establish your national coordinating mechanism? So, Besar, I'm going to ask you to just please say 1, 2, 3 things, but very briefly, just name them for the sake of time.
Okay, thank you for your question. Actually, at the time of establishing national tobacco control mechanism, the tobacco industry was under the monopoly of the government. So at that time, we had some problems in not letting them to attend in the HQ meetings. For this reason, we decided to ask all the ministers to be a member of the HQ. So the HQ is conducted with the membership of the ministers. So there is no there was no anymore the problem of interfering of tobacco industry through the national coordination mechanism. And after that, the tobacco industries was not anymore under the monopoly of the government, and they changed into the private sectors. So we have no any problem in implementation of the convention through the national tobacco control coordination mechanisms.
Thank you very much for that answer. So I think now we've reached to the end of our webinar. I hope it's been interesting for everybody. I hope this doesn't end here. I really encourage you all to continue your conversations and your discussions by using the EasyCollab platform. Those of you that have not yet registered, please send us an email saying that you would like to be invited, and we'll send an invitation to you. I think it's good that we continue talking through this platform. And if you feel that there is a need for a future webinar, just also discuss and let us know, and we'll be happy to organize another one, maybe on some other specific issue or any subject that that you might find interesting. I want to tell you that we will be sending you an email with some questions regarding the quality of the webinar, and just so that we learn how to improve. And just to finalize, I really want to thank all of you for being here with us, for your questions, the panelists for the presentations, and especially I want to thank Rodrigo and Roy for organizing all this. And sometimes we think that technology is easy, but it's not always easy, but they managed to organize this very well. So please keep the good work, keep in contact, keep collaborating, and hope to talk to you all soon. Bye-bye, everybody.